for the intro. And welcome everybody. It's really nice to be here and chatting to you guys again. Bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen for you so you can see the presentation. So yeah, for those that don't know me, my name is Laura Alcott. I am an Associate Director at HSE Recruitment and Executive Network Group. And I'm here to talk to you today about diversity of people and thinking, the impact on risk. So this is a topic I am hugely passionate about. Anybody that knows me knows that diversity is something that I spend a huge amount of my time talking about. I've been heavily involved in the UK Women in Safety group for a number of years, and I now also sit on the committee for One Wish, which is the global coalition of women in safety. The things that we do at HSE and the ENG are also very, very focused on diversity and inclusion. You know, kind of everything that we try and do is underpinned by making the industry better, and we passionately believe that diversity and inclusion is the way to do that. So look, diversity and inclusion has been the centre of a number of conversations with many businesses, I know, for quite a while now, and for very good reason. But I'm also aware it can be quite a contentious subject, right? So oftentimes when we speak about diversity on social media in particular, we get accused of things like positive discrimination. Men in particular can sometimes feel quite left out of the conversation, and that's not at all the aim of this sort of thing at all. You know, it's super important, I believe, that everyone is involved in the diversity and inclusion conversation, and understands why we're all so passionate about it as a subject, and why it's important and how that impacts us all, and how it absolutely is not meant to rid the workforce of every white man in existence. I promise you that is not what we're here to do. So to try and help with this conversation, I wanted to go over a couple of things in particular today that I think will shed some light on the subject and hopefully help us have a really open discussion about diversity and inclusion and the impact it has on risk and safety. So in this session, what we're going to do, we're going to go over some of the facts. Then we're going to think about why on earth we care about the facts. Why is diversity and inclusion so important? How do we hire fairly? How do we increase those diversity and inclusion numbers? What issues does that then create internally, and what issues do we face when trying to look at diversity and inclusion? And also, quite importantly, I think what issues we put on ourselves and some of the stuff that we come up against. So quite a lot to get through in this time frame. So if there is anything at all while I'm chatting that you want further clarification on, please do go to the chat and ask us some questions. I don't bite, I promise. We'll have a really nice chat afterwards. So what are the facts? Starting at the beginning, we wanted to find out some information before I came and spoke to you today. So what we did at HSE is we did a survey of 500 business leaders in health and safety. Now, this was to gauge their current understanding of the situation when it comes to gender imbalance in the workplace. We are still in the process of doing the one that's focused on ethnicity, sexuality, the other sort of protected characteristics. But I thought this was a pretty good place for us to start. And what we did in that survey is we asked them a couple of really simple questions. The first being, do you believe that there is a gender imbalance in the health and safety industry? Fairly straightforward question. And, we had what we expected to come back as an answer in that, 2/3 of our respondents felt there definitely was a gender imbalance in the industry. And like I said, we weren't really surprised about that. Lots of recent studies have shown that it's less than 1/3 of industry professionals that are women currently in the safety and risk industry. And we then asked them about representation at a senior level. And only 18% of our respondents thought that currently there was fair gender representation at a senior level in the safety and risk market. And over 40% thought that was skewed and that women were underrepresented. If you'd like a copy of this report, by the way, please do drop me a line afterwards. I can send it across to you. like I said, the one that we're focusing on, ethnicities and other protected characteristics, is in process currently, but I suspect it's going to show us very, very similar results. And I think a lot of people here would probably agree that, you know, the representation isn't probably exactly fair at the moment. So just some interesting stats there for you, and hopefully giving you something to think about to start off with. But this is the important question, you know, why do we care at all about this? You know, a lot of people say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But unfortunately, I'm here to tell you the situation in the safety and risk industry is broken, and does need us looking at when it comes to diversity and inclusion and sort of readdressing that imbalance. I always like to try and give you some studies behind some of the stuff that we talk about, because I know that we really like research in the safety and risk industry. So this first link here, this is from a recent study from McKinsey & Co. that they did a couple of years ago. And what they found in this study is that companies that were in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams actually outperformed their competitors in terms of profitability by 25%. And actually they found the greater the representation on their executive boards, actually the greater the profitability. And that wasn't just confined to gender. What they also found is that when you branched out from that and looked at ethnic diversity, companies that had a more ethnically diverse board, their profitability actually was 36% above their nearest competitors. So some really quite impressive numbers there from a profitability point of view. So I think this is the first point for me, and the one that I often start with, because we know that businesses rely on profit, you know, financials are important to them. So even if your company doesn't want to consider the moral implications of diversity in the workplace, it's almost impossible for us to ignore it from a commercial point of view. It is a huge, huge risk for businesses at the moment, both financially and reputationally, to not be considering diversity and inclusion. So the bottom line really is, if you want to be in business in 10 years' time and you want to be profitable and outperforming your competitors, you need to look at your diversity and inclusion policies. That is the bottom line there. And really, you know, when we think about that, I think it's quite obvious, you know, the reason why that makes sense. So, you know, if you're looking at your company and you're looking at your executive board and you hire 10 clones for your board, and they are 10 people all from the same gender, all from the same background, all from the same culture, you know, they tend to have the same outlook on things. They tend to come up with the same ideas. You know, you're not getting those fresh perspectives that companies really, really need to be able to progress, and particularly in the safety and risk industry. You know, going back to when I first started out, sort of 12 years ago, it was quite traditional for risk and safety professionals to kind of hold their knowledge and things very much to themselves and kind of silo themselves, and we've massively broken out of that mold. So we need more ideas, you know, we need more people coming with fresh ideas and things we haven't thought about and looking at things in a different way. And that absolutely is going to help us in terms of the risk profile in our business, in terms of financial and reputational risk. You know, there absolutely is a skills shortage in the market at the moment. There are far more professionals retiring and leaving the industry than we have coming into the industry at the moment. And unless we can attract and retain those new individuals and those fresh perspectives, you know, we are really, really going to struggle. This second link here kind of backs up some of that information when it comes to attracting new people into the industry, which is a huge, huge risk for us at the moment. You know, it's definitely something we all need to be considering. So this is a report that PwC did on driving social mobility. And what they looked at in that report is, what do different groups of people think is the biggest barrier to them in terms of progression, in terms of getting into career, getting into employment. And the results were really, really interesting. It came out that The group that was sort of 55 and over tended to think that the biggest barrier to them in their career was always qualifications. Skills and education was the big thing that came out for them. But when they delved down into the 18 to 34-year-olds, and these are the people that we massively need to attract to the risk and safety industry, the picture for the 18 to 34-year-olds was drastically different. What came up with them was 27% thought that their ethnicity was going to be a concern or a barrier to them in the workplace. 27% thought lack of support network, not having the right people around them that understood them and understood where they were coming from. 24% thought that their gender was going to be a barrier to success for them. 24% thought that disability was going to be a huge barrier for them. And 24% thought where people grew up, where they came from, was going to hamper them in what they were trying to do. So, in this younger age groups that we absolutely need to attract if we're going to keep the risk industry moving forward, there is a genuine feeling for them that things beyond their control are going to hamper their ability to get on in life. So I really see it as our responsibility in the safety and risk market to ensure that these things are not barriers for them, to ensure that these fresh ideas, these fresh perspectives that we ultimately desperately need are coming through. So yeah, some really good studies there for you to go away and have a look at. The third link here is actually from the HSE website themselves, and they talk about their plans in terms of diversity and what they aim to do to kind of redress the balance and why it's important to them. And they had a quote that I thought was really insightful on there that said, to be successful, the HSE needs to be an organisation that understands the diverse society in which it operates, which is just, I think, a really succinct way of looking at this. We absolutely need representation. Representation within your teams helps create buy-in. It helps create engagement. It's massively important for risk and safety. People relate to people that are similar to them, and if you don't see anyone that is similar to you, that comes from a similar background, that has a similar life experience, that communication can be really tricky, and can absolutely be a problem in all areas of your business, but particularly in sort of safety and risk. So some really good studies, a little bit of homework for you there to go away and read. But hopefully this stuff has started to go some way in convincing you as to, why we believe diversity and inclusion is so important, why it's something that I'm so passionate about, and, why we absolutely do need to address the imbalance within the industry. So how on earth do we do that? That's the big question. This is something that I think a lot of people get quite hung up about, is, how do we bring diverse talent in? How do we ensure that the processes are fair? How do we ensure that people within the company understand the reasons behind it and understand that, like I said at the beginning, we're not trying to push out every, white man in existence. That's absolutely not what this is about. So there are a lot of challenges, I think, that come with this aspect of sort of hiring fairly. But the first thing I kind of want to start with was just the idea of making our hiring more diverse. It's a really simple start point as to what we need to do. Is we need to get those diverse people in. We need to attract the youth, the different ethnicities, the different life experiences. And there's lots of ways that we can do this in our hiring process. So blind hiring. This is something that comes up quite a lot. So many companies, what they do is they try and take names off the CVs to try and help with that unconscious bias that may occur in businesses. That has been proven, that certain companies in certain areas, they do have that unconscious bias when it comes to very traditional white-sounding names. So that's one way that we can start looking at this, is taking the names off the CVs. But to be honest, I don't personally think that probably works as well as people hope that it does, because as someone who reads CVs for a living, I can tell you it's still very, very easy to gauge a number of things from a person's CV, even without the name on it, even when it's blanked up. So, for example, you can see where they went to school. You can see how old they are. You can usually see what sort of area they're from, where they live. Sometimes there are things in the styles of writing, that point to various different characteristics. So I just don't think it's as simple as taking a name off someone's CV and saying, well, there you go, that's it. We've got rid of all our unconscious bias. So I always use the example that a couple of years ago, HS2 did a project where they actually took CVs out of the equation altogether when they were hiring into one of their projects, and instead they focused on competency interview questions as the application. So I think we're very, very used to competency interviews as the interview, but they took it that step further and put it as the application process. So what that did, or what they hoped that was going to do, was get rid of unconscious bias entirely, because you couldn't see anything about that person. You had no clues as to defining characteristics, where they were from. You couldn't be led by companies they'd worked for. You couldn't be swayed by the fact that, oh, they work there and I know they have a certain demographic. None of that could be even in consideration. But what they would do is say, so, for example, give us a time where you've developed safety culture, and tell us about that. And that was the application process. Anecdotally, during that project, their numbers of diverse hires did increase. It absolutely had an impact, which really shows that if we get this right, taking conscious and unconscious bias out of the hiring process can have a really immediate effect. We've weirdly, conversely, gone the exact opposite way with it in our process. So, like I said, we're really, really underpinned by the ideas of diversity and inclusion, but we're quite passionate about the idea that to understand something, you have to have data around it. So what we did is we started introducing things like video interviews. Video interviews as part of the application process. So what we would do is, when we were working with a client, we'd say, right, instead of sending you a CV, I'm going to send you a video of this person talking about their skills and their ability to do this role. At first, we were told that would absolutely backfire, because people could then see the person. That's obviously all these unconscious biases, could be a factor, because they could see who the person was, they could see, their ethnicity and where they were from and all of this sort of thing. But what we did is we added metrics to it. So during these video snippets that we would send to clients, our software would measure how long they watched those videos and at what point they clicked out, to try and get some understanding. And what we found with certain clients was we were able to point to unconscious bias in their process, because we could say, well, okay, your hiring manager, we sent them 10 video profiles and they watched all of the profiles for the white candidates to the very end, but anyone who was from a different background, they actually only watched the first 30 seconds and then they clicked out. So we found that was really, really helpful in terms of a metric, and being able to give that feedback back to the employer and say, you've got some issues here, these are things that we need to address internally, because we can't, I don't think, fix the problem unless we know exactly what the problem is. So that's a little bit about the concept of blind hiring and conscious and unconscious bias, that I think is quite interesting. There are, however, still hurdles in the hiring process. No matter how much you try and take bias out of your recruitment process, there are still other things that impact it. So for example, if you're finding that you aren't getting enough diverse applicants for your roles, even though you have tried to take as much of the bias out of your process as possible, they're just not applying for the jobs in the first place. There could be massive reasons for that as well. So one of the big ones that we advise people is to look at the sources, look at where they're trying to find candidates from. So a really good example of that is this. If your company tends to only ever get 40-year-old white men apply for their jobs. And they're trying to change their diversity numbers, but they're just not getting the applications. And then they go back and look at their hiring process. So they think, yeah, we took all the unconscious bias out, but we only ever advertise in The Guardian. It could be that that's the source, and that's the problem there, is that it's because you're not even reaching those applicants to start with. And you need to look at other areas and look at how people access information. So, for example, you're trying to bring more use into the office. You know, you're trying to get people, you know, fresh out of university and attract those new, interesting perspectives. You know, a lot of young people, they don't read traditional media anymore, so they're not even seeing that interview, that advert in the first place. So that's always a big issue, and something that we advise people to look at as well in the hiring process. You know, look at the unconscious bias, look at the sources that you're using. And then one final hurdle for people is, you know, say your HR team has done all that, they've got rid of the unconscious bias, they're advertising in diverse places, and they're still not getting the right people applying. That tends to be to do with perception, and that's either industry perception about the safety and risk industry, that it's not a, you know, maybe there's a perception that we don't welcome people outside, you know, from different ethnicities or different sexualities or whatever it is, or you know, that it's the construction industry. Maybe the construction industry, you know, has previously had a bias around it, that they, you know, the banter level may not be appropriate for certain sections of society. Whatever it might be, it tends to then boil down to a perception issue. But the good news about all this is, look, we can do stuff about this. Knowing is half the battle when it comes to increasing your diversity numbers. So, you know, if your company is on a path to try and address the imbalances within the workforce, they need to be aware of these things, and they need to look at where they advertise. They need to check that their recruitment process is unbiased, and they need to find out what the perception is of their brand and their industry in the marketplace, and is it attractive to the demographic that they're looking to hire. So lots and lots of stuff to think about there. Hopefully you will agree we've come on quite a journey already so far, and I think we've learned a lot about the imbalances, you know, why it's important to address those, some of the risks that not addressing that has, how we can address that in the hiring process. But if you ask any woman here, you know, that's listening to this, and I'm certain they will have anecdotal stories about times where during their career journey they've been in an office or a work environment where, you know, they felt excluded, or they felt overlooked, or, you know, God forbid, they've been treated like the tea lady, even when they're the most senior person on a project. And that goes for people from different ethnicities, different sexualities as well. I'm certain that all of these people will have these anecdotal stories of work environments that haven't been appropriate for them at some point during their career. And this is something that I think is probably the most important, is focusing on the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion. You know, looking at diversity alone kind of isn't enough, because you can do all of this right, and you can attract all the right people, and you can make sure that, you know, you're thinking about your company's risk profile and making sure that we're looking to the future, and then you hire all these people and they leave because they don't feel included. You know, that's a huge waste of time for everybody, and it's not great for your brand and your reputation in the marketplace. So what do we face internally in terms of issues? This, I thought, was a really good Venn diagram that I wanted to share with you, that kind of, for me, encompasses the whole thing. You know, if we are looking to create a sense of belonging, which is massively important, we need to look at diversity, we need to look at inclusion, making those people feel included, but we also need to look at equity. And equity is the bit that I think sometimes gets left out of the conversation. And it's a hugely important part of the conversation, alongside inclusion. The difference between equity and something being equal often gets confused. So I wanted to kind of clarify that a little bit. So equality is making sure that everybody has access to the same opportunities, right? So everybody is treated exactly the same, which is, I think, where a lot of companies start on their diversity journey. But equality, treating everyone the same, actually probably isn't actually the right approach for us. What we need to look at is equity, and equity is giving everybody the opportunity they need to personally succeed. So that might mean, for example, giving someone a leg up when it comes to work. So giving someone more flexible hours because they have childcare issues, or giving someone appropriate accommodations for a disability. Those are things that make the workplace equitable. And then that all sort of collects in that sense of belonging, that everybody is getting a fair go at things. I think a really good example in the safety world to look at equity is, for example, giving everybody the same PPE, right? So if you have a very diverse workforce and you give everybody the same PPE, that's equal. But it's not equitable, because you may have women, for example, where they're absolutely swamped by the PPE, and it actually makes it more dangerous for them to work. So that's why we need to look at the difference between equity and equality, quite an important difference. Weirdly, I think that the pandemic has massively come a long way in helping us with this. So flexible working, hybrid working has really come to the forefront as a result of the pandemic. And the continuation of this will really enable us to allow more women, for example, to enter the workforce, people with challenges when it comes to disabilities or caring responsibilities, those sorts of things. This flexible working, this hybrid working is already really helping to readdress the balance in that respect. It now means that the fact that you are a carer, or the fact that you have children, or that you're a single parent, no longer has to have a huge impact on you. And flexible working and hybrid working is good for all of us, not just for readdressing the balance. But we've absolutely seen this anecdotally as well. In the last sort of 12 months, we've seen our shortlists become way more diverse, because we're able to include people that we previously couldn't have considered, because companies are being more open. They're saying, well, actually, previously we would only consider people that were in a half-hour commute of the office. And then that knocks out a huge section of the population, and that knocks out a huge area that we're trying to address. Whereas now they're saying we have hybrid working, they can work from home, so actually it doesn't matter where they live, and it means that we can give them different people. It means that now we've got someone who's a single parent and has to drop their kid off at school, and previously they weren't allowed to do that because it was 9 to 5 bums on seats in the office. But now, look, we can be flexible with our time. You can have later starts, you can work later in the evening, you can do whatever it takes to make the role work for you. So definitely the flexible working and the hybrid working is having a huge impact on readdressing the balance. So covering a lot of stuff. Gone over the facts, gone over why we should care about the facts. How do we go about making sure we're hiring fairly when we're trying to hire more diversely? What are some of the issues we face internally? What are some of the things we need to think about in terms of equity and flexible working? And then finally is some of the issues that we put on ourselves, which I think is a really interesting concept for me. A lot of this talk, I have tried to focus on all areas of diversity and inclusion, focusing on ethnicities and sexualities and things like that. But, the gender thing is a very important point to me, and one that I do come back to. And some of this may be a little bit more specific for sort of women in industry, but I absolutely think that we can expand this and get this helping people in all walks of life. So there is a really compelling statistic that is often quoted from a Hewlett-Packard internal report. And that said that basically they found in this report, men apply for a job when they meet about 60% of the qualifications, but women apply only when they hit 100% of them. And this is something that I absolutely anecdotally have found to be true during my sort of 12 years in the recruitment business. All too often I will headhunt a woman for a role and I think they would be perfect for it, and they sort of reply with, Yeah, oh yeah, I saw that role, but I didn't think I was strong enough for it. I thought maybe it was too big for me. I didn't have quite the right qualification level for it. Now that is not to say that glass ceilings don't exist, because of course they do. A glass ceiling is still very much a thing in a lot of businesses, but there is definitely a sticky floor situation that a lot of us sometimes fall into. So what is a sticky floor? Sticky floor is basically our self-limiting beliefs, assumptions, sabotaging behaviors, things that undermine our career professions, things that keep us where we are, things that stop us, taking that next step or applying for that role or asking for that raise. And this is a real problem for women in industry, definitely, but absolutely this is a problem for diversity and inclusion in general, because I think a lot of people coming from different backgrounds, they are assuming potentially that they are going to face these barriers, and we are trying to remove that thought process, but we do need to do some work on that ourselves. So the major thing that I like to advise people that think they might be in this situation, they might have a little bit of sticky floor thinking going on, is to massively try and face your fears. What is the absolute worst thing that could happen by you applying for a role that you think is, a little bit of a stretch, or, you're slightly under the required level, or you're missing, the odd qualification? The worst case scenario is you don't get the job. You already don't have the job. Literally nothing in your situation changes. You have nothing to lose by putting yourself out there and trying. What may happen is you get surprised, you get invited to interview. An interview is a valuable process for all of us. You get experience, you learn more about what you need, you build connections with people in industry, stuff that will help you in the long term. And then your best case scenario is you might actually get the role. And that happens more often than you might think. And when I'm recruiting for my clients, we always try and put in what we call a wild card. And we always include a wild card in our shortlists. And these tend to be people that don't necessarily have every single qualification or every single thing that the client is asking us for. Maybe they don't have the exact industry experience, or maybe they're a couple of years short of the experience the client wants, or maybe they've got a different qualification route. And the reason we do that is, one, it massively opens up the diverse pool. We find that sometimes it is the qualification. Certain people go a certain route, some people go a different route. And if we are being very prescriptive on, well, we will only see people that are chartered professionals, that knocks out a huge amount of the diverse talent pool. And the other reason that we like to include these people is that often they've got what the client is looking for. They've got that X factor, they've got the passion, they've got the drive, they're the right cultural fit, the personalities match. They're someone that we can really see taking our client and moving them forward and really helping them grow. And we don't want them to discount that person on the basis of, they don't fit this very prescriptive viewpoint. And yeah, you wouldn't believe how many times the wild card gets the role. It happens very often. So, they surprise the client at interview, they excite them, the client can really see their potential and the ability for them to change the things that they do and shake things up. So that's my first call of action for you today. Is I really want you to put yourselves out there, apply for roles even when you're not sure, reach out to hiring managers and recruiters, tell them why you think you're good for this sort of thing. You never know what could happen in that respect. I also want to encourage people to face their fears and put themselves out there in respect to personal branding and standing out from the crowd. So I often use an example of a few years ago, I spoke at the Safety and Health Expo on this subject, and a lady came up to me afterwards and she said, Laura, this is great. I love this talk, and you gave me some really good stuff to think about. But the thing I struggle with is I just don't see anybody that looks like me or is always from my background, or I just don't see anyone that reflects who I am in the industry. So I find it really hard because I don't have anyone to mentor me, and I don't have anyone to point me in the right direction or to forge that path for me. And my answer to her was, if you don't see that person, be that person, which she absolutely has done. And her career has been just phenomenal to watch over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. So yeah, face your fears. Please put yourselves out there, go for things, stick your hand up, make a fuss, because, you know, at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need to see new people. We need to see new perspectives. And sometimes you just have to kick the door down a little bit. Another tip that I like to give to people in industry is to ask for what you want in certain situations. And this tends to imply internally. You know, I think, particularly when we look at the gender imbalance, that we as women have been very conditioned to not cause a fuss, to kind of just go with the status quo. And it absolutely does hold us back, you know. And again, not to overgeneralize, so I realize this isn't all women or all men, but what I tend to see as a recruiter is that men have a lot more faith in themselves, and they're absolutely more willing, as a rule, to go and speak to their boss and say, look, I think you are underpaying me, or I think you're overlooking me, I think I need that promotion, than women, or, you know, people in a minority or different sexuality are. That absolutely happens a lot. And in fact, there was a BBC survey from a few years ago that found there was only 32% of women that would feel comfortable asking for a pay rise or a promotion, in comparison to 51% of men. So there's a very big disparity there in the confidence levels. And, you know, when we look at the safety and risk industry, and you know, we completely can see that there is underrepresentation for, you know, protected characteristics throughout the industry. This is a huge thing to address. You know, I really think we do need to put ourselves out there more. As I said in sort of the first point, we need to take chances, and we need to stand up and be counted. And that's going to be a really, really big part of it. When it comes to that, when it comes to, you know, putting yourself out there in your own role and saying to them, you're underpaying me, or you're overlooking me, or that person is getting paid more than me for doing the same role, I understand that is scary, and that is really, really hard to do. But someone once told me that confidence is related to being prepared, and I think that's absolutely true, and something that I've definitely tried to hold on to throughout my career. You know, you need to know why you're good at your job. What is it that sets you apart? What is it that makes you an asset to the company? Have stats that back up your points, and then go and tell them. So if it is that, you know, you are doing the exact same job as someone else and they're underpaying you for it, you know, you need to have those statistics to kind of back that up. It's a reason that I say to candidates all the time, it's really important that you talk about salaries with your colleagues. You know, there's this old school view that we're not meant to do this. The only reason not to do that is because, you know, HR want to hide what people are earning. So absolutely have conversations, you know, and make sure that you all are being treated equitably. And if not, please, I know it's scary, but try and go and have those conversations, and see if it is something that we can address, because it may be they aren't doing it on purpose. It's an unconscious bias thing, and if you bring it to their attention, they will address it. It may be that, you know, they are doing it on purpose, but at least having that conversation will allow you to know that, and you can then focus on potentially looking elsewhere and trying to find someone that will support you in your career. So that is a whistle-stop tour through diversity, people thinking, risk. We could talk about this for days and days and days. And I know there's loads and loads of stuff that I haven't even had a chance to cover in this. So any further questions, please do ask them now, or please do come and speak to me after the event. But a little bit of a summary for you. It is a fact that, you know, women and minorities are underrepresented at all levels in the safety and the risk industry. It is a fact that this is a huge risk to business. You know, companies that are more gender balanced, more ethnically diverse, outperform their competitors, and they are more profitable. We have to address bias in the recruitment process. We have to look at the ways that we're hiring. We need to create inclusive and equitable cultures, so that when we get that diverse talent, we're holding on to it. And we need to stand up and be counted. You know, we need to be very visible in industry, be prepared, be confident, and make sure you have a plan for your careers. And hopefully that will give you some really good things to think about today. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was a really interesting and thought-provoking presentation. We do have a few questions, so I'll kick off with those if I may.
Yeah, please.
So the first one is, we're a small company, excuse me, with a low turnover of staff. And obviously we can't do everything that you've suggested.
Yeah.
But is there one thing we could or should focus on to improve our D&I?
For me, and again, if you've ever heard me speak before, you'll have heard me talk about this. Diversity and inclusion is my one love. Branding is my other love. So for me, a lot of this, I would say, if you can only do one thing, would come down to branding and perception, because perception is a huge issue in the marketplace. So for example, you can look at a company like Kia. So Kia, a very traditional construction company. Obviously they're on the much bigger scale, but they knew there was a perception problem with them. So what they did is they started attending Pride every year. And every year they put a float in Pride. And that one little thing instantly says to people, you know, Kia are a company that care about diversity. They care about, you know, LGBTQA, and they want to make sure that they're looking after those members of staff. So for me, that would be the thing, is branding and perception. Just see if you can just do something, whether it's on your social media, whether it's on your website, whether it's just the way that people represent you when they're talking to people about the company, something that shows that your company, the perception is that we accept you and we want you to come and join us. So yeah, definitely that would probably be my key starting point.
That's great, thank you. Next question then is, how do I start this discussion with my HR department? I want to increase diversity in our safety team, but I'm not sure how to address it.
Okay, so the first thing first is just do it. See, I think people overcomplicate this, and they worry about the right way to go about this. I promise you that any good company, their HR department is already thinking about this. This should be on their radar. So the first thing is go and have that conversation with them and say, you know, we're finding in the safety and risk team, you know, we're not that diverse. I want to help with that. Are you doing anything at the moment that would help with that? You know, what are your processes? And find out what they're doing already, because it could be that, you know, in other areas of the business, they have really good processes for this. And you know, they are attracting different people, and they've just not thought to apply it to the safety and the risk team. I would be very surprised if they don't have anything on their radar in HR, but if they don't, it's absolutely then, I think, vital that we point them in the right direction. And that comes from that being prepared thing. So making sure that we go away and we look at resources for them. So we're not just coming to them with a problem. You know, we're not just coming and saying, okay, look, we're not very diverse, we need to do something about it. You're coming and saying, okay, well, I know you haven't really thought about this, but I have, and here's some ideas for you. So yeah, first things first, go and have the conversation with them, see what they're already doing, and if not, prepare something for them and point them in the right direction, because I would be amazed at an HR team that turns away ideas on how to increase diversity and inclusion. So hopefully that should help in the first instance.
Okay, thank you very much. Can too much focus on D&I mean that we will overlook good people in safety and risk who don't fall into a particular diversity box?
Yeah, so this comes up so often, this question, and I completely understand why. This is, you know, I think change is scary. Change is scary for everyone. And I think particularly if you are, you know, a white professional, or you're a man, or you're someone that traditionally has not had a problem with this, has not had a problem with being employed, we worry that sometimes we are going to get overlooked and that they're going to, you know, positively discriminate and put people above us. So I completely get where that worry comes from. I think a good way of reframing it in your mind, there was a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was asked once about when do you think there will be enough women on the Supreme Court? And she said, when all 9 of them are women. And everyone was hugely shocked. I said, but that would be so unfair if all 9 are women. And she said, well, all 9 have been men for the last 100 years, and that's never been a problem. So I understand that change is scary, and it may be there will be some positive discrimination, but at the end of the day, none of this is meant to stop the right person getting the job. Companies still absolutely want to hire the right person. What you've got to think is, if you are up against someone and you have the exact same qualifications, you have the exact same experience, and the only difference is that you're white and they're not, it may be that previously you've got that leg up because of your privilege and they haven't. So it's time to kind of readdress the balance. But I promise you, this is not an effort to get rid of all white men in the workforce. It's absolutely not that. There is at no point, I think, the balance is going to tip in the other direction for a number of years. This is just about, readdressing the balance.
Okay, thank you. And a long question here. Lovely start to it, though. As always, Laura, great to hear your presentation. Within the recruitment process, do you find that you are receiving or hearing from people that feel that they are underrepresented within that particular sector? Or is there a requirement for this to be highlighted in other ways to encourage people to choose this particular sector as a career choice?
Okay, absolutely. When we're speaking to people, there is a feeling of underrepresentation. I think the gender imbalance is starting to sway, so it's not as bad as it definitely was. But in terms of other things like sexualities, ethnicities, disability, disability is a huge one. That absolutely, there is so much more work to be done. So yeah, when we're speaking to people, they feel underrepresented. In terms of the second part of the question, in how do we sort of highlight that, again, for me, that comes down to that branding and perception base, and highlighting the fact that, we as a company, we understand that's an issue, but this is what we're doing to address that. I think, diversity and inclusion, this shouldn't be something that's done under, under the covers, so no one sees what's happening. We should be talking about this. The more we talk about this, the more people understand it, and you will get pushback. Like I said, every time we highlight something like this on social media, we get pushback, and that's going to happen because we're trying to change the world. But I think the more conversations we have about this and the more we highlight it, the better the industry is going to be. I hope that answers the question. If not, please do drop me another line.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And is there any good reading or good books that you could recommend on this subject?
Absolutely. So that is, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, there are hundreds and hundreds of books that you can look at. One that I am really enjoying at the moment that I would actually recommend to everybody is actually a book on statistics, which sounds really dull, but I promise that it's not. It's a book called Invisible Women. Exposing data bias in a world designed for men. This book is really fascinating, and this actually is very applicable to the safety and risk market, because what it does is it looks at how data has been skewed previously by ignoring the differences in the sexes and the impact that's had on safety. So, for example, did you know that car crash test dummies are always modelled on, a man of a certain age and height, and that's why women are injured disproportionately in car accidents. So there's a lot of stuff built into health and safety that actually comes back to this statistics. So loads on there on diversity and inclusion, but if you're particularly interested in the other safety and risk aspect, I would highly recommend that Invisible Women. Available on Amazon, but in all other good bookstops.
Thank you for that caveat. Thank you. I'm just checking to see if there are any more questions. Just give people a
no problem at all.
Minutes just to see.
Like I said, if anyone does come up with something afterwards, because I know people sometimes don't want to ask in this sort of format, then my LinkedIn is there, my Instagram is there, my email is there. Please do give me a call or send me a message, because I'm always happy to talk about this sort of stuff.
Right, thank you very much. I don't think there are any more questions at the moment, so I think we'll leave it there for today. Thank you ever so much again, Laura, for sharing your knowledge with us, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this afternoon as well. Just a reminder that the recording will be on the YouTube channel either later on today or tomorrow. So you'll be able to catch up or recap or look at some of the links in more detail on anything that you want to follow up on in your own time. So thank you ever so much for joining us. Thank you again, Laura, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.